Hello, everybody. My name is Matthias Berninger. I'm joining you today from Washington, D.C. I wish you a great morning, great afternoon, or great evening, depending on from where you are listening. I was asked to present a bit my learnings from my career, and under the headline of Detours that increase the understanding of the surroundings, I want to make a link to my professional journey and to the topic of this conference, talk a bit about what's ahead of us. Before I do that, a few words about Bayer. Bayer is a very old company. It has been founded in the 19th century. It was one of the pioneers of the chemical industry. At this intersection of the emerging chemical industry, inventors at Bayer's were at the forefront of basically utilizing what we today know as organic chemistry. We have been pioneering material sciences, pharmaceuticals, crop science, and many other areas that were possible after people realized that you can make more out of tar chemistry than just beautiful new colors. Bayer is also a company that from the start exported their products globally. Today, we are present in almost every major market around the world, and we pride ourselves in being a company at the intersection of the different life sciences. So you find a strong presence in crop science, in pharmaceuticals, and in consumer health. I joined in 2019, and one of the earliest things we worked on was to sharpen the way we position Bayer in the world. Our vision is health for all, hunger for none. Now, with what I said about the categories we operate in, it's not surprising that we are operating in the health and in the hunger space. But the important part of our vision are the two words all and none. So Bayer is on a journey to have a much more inclusive growth strategy to reach many more of the soon 8 billion people. We have fully integrated sustainability and the aim to generate sustainable impact in our strategy. And we also have sharpened our foundation in terms of a values-based business. I will talk a bit more about that later on in my presentation. Our presence in South Asia is not as big as it is further east in China or further west in Europe and the United States or generally in the Americas. But we have made great progress in India. I think we are clearly a systemic contributor to agriculture in South Asia. We have started to increase access to medicine in India. So I think generally speaking, even before the pandemic, we have made great strides to reach more people with our products. Like many other companies, you will find Bayer as one of the players that also tries to operate in the space of CSR, tries to help communities beyond our business. But our main aim is to support communities through our business. We believe that reaching more smallholder farmers, helping communities to thrive, helping women in communities is one of the areas where we can make a huge difference. And India and the rest of the South Asian countries are clearly a focus area for us, an area where we have decided to invest much more than what we've done in the past. I want to start, and that goes to the theme of this talk, with a quote from Anita Desai, who said, "Wherever you go becomes part of you." And I want to share 5 stations of my life or chapters of my life and the key takeaway, and potentially refer to some of them later in the talk as well. So what you can see is basically 5 things that really have shaped me as a professional, but even more so as a human being. I want to start with 1989. Last year, we celebrated the fall of the Iron Curtain. This year, we celebrated, for example, the reunification of my initial home country, Germany. And I'm one of those people who lived right at the Iron Curtain on the western side, but I've seen how Europe and my home country, Germany, was divided. And I've seen, I think, the ugly side of a bipolar world, experienced that also personally in my family. So when the Iron Curtain came down, I was roughly 18 years old. My world changed fundamentally, and it's not as fundamental as the life has changed for many people in Asia, most notably in China, looking at the development leaps people made in the last 30 or 40 years. But it was still a fundamental change. And that change is something that I very much carry in me. The second event only happened 3 years later, at a time where still George Bush, the older, was president, or in Germany, Helmut Kohl. And that was the UN United Nations conference in Rio that put sustainability squarely on the map. And nothing since then could be strong enough to kind of remove this topic from one of the pole positions in the global agenda. Even the pandemic we faced this year hasn't changed anything on that one. For me, the United Nations conference in Rio, the conclusions for topics like biodiversity, climate change, but also the need to fully include development into the consideration set, which led ultimately to the global goals on sustainable development the world has set itself in 2015, was one of those formative events. The topic of sustainability has never lost its grip on me. And I think a lot of what has been discussed in 1992 is still, unfortunately, very current. For me, I have to say that the pressure on systems, the environmental challenges are actually much sharper in their impact on life today than I would have expected some 30 years ago. I believe one of the key insights is that in 1992, people have underestimated the speed and the impact of the changes we are facing today. I was elected at the age of 23 as a member of the German parliament. So if you will, after selling bicycles and studying chemistry, I ended up in the German parliament for 13 years of my life. Some of them I also was honored to represent Germany in the government, especially during the mad cow crisis. And for me, those were 13 years of deep learning of how the political world operates, and I will refer back to that a bit more. I then decided that I don't want to spend my whole life in the parliament and was asked to join a family-owned company, Mars, in 2007. I know Mars is presenting at this event as well, my friend Andy Farrow, and it's a wonderful company. What I took away from working for the Mars family is the importance of values, especially of the value of mutuality or win-win when you operate a business. This business has been in family ownership for more than 100 years, and I have seen in very practical ways how values-based business decisions not only protect the reputation of a business, but also are the foundation for sustainable growth. And of course, that insight is something I will always carry around. In 2019, I joined Bayer. I couldn't resist the offer because I think Bayer is one of the very systemic players, both in agriculture and health, and also in the next breakthrough innovations I will talk a bit about in a couple of minutes. But Bayer, for me, is one of those companies where if we get it right, we really can have a driving force to advance the global goals on sustainable development. And when they asked me to join, I had very tough conversations with myself and with my friends at Mars and finally decided to make that shift. Before I go into more details about that shift, I want to talk about three driving forces that I believe are most pertinent and most relevant for how we need to look at the world. I believe that everything we do in the space of public relations, government relations, communications needs to look at what are the underlying forces. We are so often pressure prompted. We are so often looking at what's going on. The crucial question is, what are the underlying tectonic shifts that drive certain discussions? I've done a lot of reflection on that, and I humbly want to share the three that I find most important, most pertinent. The first one is the economic and political power shift that people in South Asia and in East Asia experience in today's world. I think it's pretty clear that this economic and political power shift will shape our lives in the next 10 to 20 to 30 years. It already has started to shape our lives since the Iron Curtain came down. The picture you see here depicting this power shift are two very important negotiations. The truce after the Boxer Rebellion in black and white, and then on top of that, negotiations of the incoming Trump administration with the Chinese. And what you see is on the Boxer Rebellion, you have a bunch of very young Europeans negotiating with seemingly more inflexible, older Chinese representatives. And then the opposite picture for the negotiations of the future of the trade relationships between the US and China. I find this one of the best pictures representing what the world is currently facing. And I think that for business to be able to navigate this power shift is going to be absolutely crucial. The second force is what I already started to talk about when reflecting on what the UN conference in Rio means to me. It's the age of the Anthropocene. And the age of the Anthropocene basically means that we are overstepping our planetary boundaries, that the world population, which has doubled in my lifetime, is growing, but at the same time, we haven't found the magic formula to help everybody to live a decent life and leave poverty or extreme poverty behind whilst respecting the planetary boundaries. That is something that is impacting almost every business. Investors, as well as public policy stakeholders and the broader public, demand from the business community to do much more in this space. And the driving force is that we, for the first time in human history, have the power to change global conditions, not local or regional, but global conditions. And that currently we are on track of catapulting humanity out of its climate comfort zone. And that's easily said, but the consequences for humans around the world will be dire. So age of the Anthropocene, clearly one of those tectonic forces. The third one is the biorevolution. And the biorevolution is a disruption of many, many value chains, probably akin to what happened when organic chemistry found its way into the world at the end of the 19th century. We're going to see at the intersection of genetics on the one side and artificial intelligence on the other side, breakthrough innovation that will reshape how we think about lots of businesses and categories. And it will also reshape the relationships of humans with nature. The biorevolution will raise lots of concerns. I know India is one of those countries where this is a political debate and is a topic we need to look at much harder. I will talk a bit more in detail about it, but on the picture you see two women, Emmanuelle Charpentier on the one side and Jennifer Doudna on the other side. Emmanuelle and Jennifer were awarded the Nobel Prize for Chemistry for their discovery in the area of gene editing, which not only is a sensation because there haven't been that many women who have been awarded the Nobel Prize for Chemistry, but also because from the point of discovering gene editing to the award of the Nobel Prize, the time that lies between that is really, really very short. So it was quite an impressive kind of achievement of those two researchers for their discovery in a space that will be very, very relevant. More details about that later. So let's talk for a moment about the power shift. It's pretty obvious that the economic and political power shift has strengthened China as one of the key players in the world. I think it's safe to predict now that we are on course to be operating in a bipolar world. It's no longer the United States and Russia being the two kind of poles in this world, but it's going to be the United States and China. So the question how those two countries build a relationship with each other, the question how business can help avoiding that they are completely drifting away from each other is going to be one of the crucial questions of our time. I think this power shift has lots of consequences for how we operate as businesses, and it will go well beyond the controversies we have seen during the one-term presidency of President Trump. I think business will be more and more dragged into the changes that are happening in the bipolar world. The Chinese firewall for digital is only one example for frictions. I think we can expect more, and we need to be able to navigate that really well. Now, next year, India will not only celebrate the 75th anniversary of their independence, it will also lead the G20 presidency. I personally believe G20, not the UN, but G20 is the place where the world needs to come together and decide on a global agenda. There is still a kind of very old structure of the G7, where the old industrial nations come together and try to rule the world. I doubt that in the future, this construct really will be successful. So I firmly believe for business to be much better in understanding the G20, and for the G20 to take the role to help the world to deal with global crises is the place to be. G20 has been created in 1999. I still remember that back in my days in politics, as a response to the Asian financial crisis. It clearly helped the world to overcome the 2008 financial crisis, and it's moving now more and more beyond the financial and core economic topics in the other societal relevant questions, be it health, the pandemic, for example, be it climate change or other challenges of the age of the Anthropocene, or be it finding balance where global institutions have more difficulties. So for me, G20 is really crucial, and we are already preparing for how we want to influence the agenda of the G20, not only under Italian presidency in 2021, but also in 2022, when India is taking over at the kind of coincidence of also the 75th independence of this beautiful country. So G20, very important for business, is one of the things I want you to take away. I spoke about the age of the Anthropocene. First of all, the science is absolutely clear about that. So people who are doubting the science, so-called climate change deniers, are clearly in retreat. Now, of course, those who don't want to act still have another way to deal with this. They are basically talking about climate change fatalism, i.e., well, maybe this is all happening, but we can't change it anyway. So whereas deniers were the big problem in the past, fatalists are the big problems in the future. And I think for the business community to be out there and putting a clear line in the admittingly very dry soil that you see on this picture, that something can be done and that business has to change in order to help reversing the trend that we are seeing here is crucial. When you look at India, when I look at India, there's one word that comes to mind describing the challenge, and that is water. I believe that we have to prepare ourselves for really understanding how we can help the Indian subcontinent, the whole of South Asia, to deal with a very apparent water crisis. So climate change is hitting people around the world in very different ways. Water could be the one biggest destabilizing factor for India, and water matters dearly for Bayer. So if you are in crop science as a business, just the simple fact that the number one compound in every living thing, in every plant, is water. 70-80% of everything that you see growing on a field is actually water, gives you a flavor how important that topic is for Bayer. Speaking about the importance of the topic for Bayer, when I was born, we roughly used as much resources in the world than the world could regenerate. There is an organization that talks about the Earth Overshoot Day. The Earth Overshoot Day is the day where we ultimately kind of have consumed all the resources that could be replenished. 2 years ago, or in 2019, that was late July, This year, it moved 3 weeks back into August. So in other words, the pandemic had a positive effect on our resource uses, but it also taught us an important lesson at global scale, to believe that just by stopping consumption, we would be able to solve the problems of the world is ultimately a very wrong belief. We have a increase in food insecurity. We have a global reduction of incomes. The poorest people in the world are not dying because they are contracting the coronavirus. They are dying because of the consequences of the pandemic and the slowdown. So ultimately, the lesson I took away from the experience of 2020 is only a relentless focus on innovation will help us to balance both the eradication of poverty and to do business within the planetary boundaries. The reason why I chose this slide, though, is to underpin why I joined Bayer. So you see on the slide not only that our footprint in my lifetime has moved from being roughly, we use exactly what the planet is giving us, to we need roughly 1.6 planets at the moment. We are on track to needing 2 planets very soon. And what this organization of the Earth Overshoot Day, I think, does very well, it illustrates the areas in which we need to invest to kind of push back that date back to like end of the year where it was when I was born. They talk about reforestation and forest protection being a core topic, very important for Bayer, because we believe that net zero deforestation is possible if we invest in modernizing agriculture and if we intensify in a sustainable way. They talk about carbon emission reductions, also very important for us. Bayer has committed to be carbon neutral by 2030. Many economies from Japan to China to, for example, the European Union, perhaps also the United States, are committing to do the same by 2050. So we are a bit ahead of the curve. Efficient use of existing technologies, a lot is possible in this space. We all know it when we look at our operations, especially when we really get a hard look at are we always using the best technologies. In order for us to do that, we developed an internal carbon price, for example, of 100 euros per ton, just so that people, when they make investments, can really invest in efficiency. Reducing food waste is a big, big topic. Now, it's not just happening at the end of the chain, so to speak, in your own fridge or in the dumpsters of supermarkets. The food waste reduction really happens on the field. So how to protect crops in a way that doesn't destroy biodiversity is one of the big future questions here. We need to eat less mammals. That is, I think, a message that is sent loud and clear from South Asia and India. I think, generally speaking, reducing our per capita meat consumption, especially mammal-based meat consumption, is going to be crucial. And then last but not least, Bayer is world leader in women's health, which includes family planning. And I was really impressed to see how important that topic is in the eyes of many. I talked about the Biorevolution. Something that is not noticed, it's not only Emmanuel Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna, it's actually 8 out of the last 10 Nobel Prizes in chemistry that were awarded in this space. There is a lot of conversation about Elon Musk and batteries and electrifying cars, and we all get excited about it. Only 1 of the last Nobel Prizes in chemistry has been awarded in the space of battery technology. So the real revolution that is going on is happening at this intersection of biology and computing science. You probably have heard a lot about it already, but I promise you, you will hear even more about it. And McKinsey did a wonderful study published in May with the title of Biorevolution that just gives you a flavor of the impact these technologies will have on many, many industries. We're going to see a similar disruption as we see in the digital space, or as we have seen in the digital space since the 1990s. But my belief is it's going to be a much deeper disruption than anything we have seen in digital, because our ability to combine insights in genomics with technologies is going to be massive. And I just try to illustrate that on the next slide. So when you look at the age of biology and the age of computing technology, you just see what this convergence is going to do. We are no longer not only able to edit genes by kind of using fragments of DNA and replacing them with other fragments of DNA, we can now do base pair editing. What you see in the space of the vaccines at the moment are mRNA vaccines. Those are vaccines that trick our ribosomes and our body in creating the right antibodies that vaccinate us against the virus. In record time, that was possible. We can see protein degradation and many, many other innovations that will revolutionize material sciences, crop protection, and most notably, healthcare. And the question is, can we really drive this disruption, and can we make it accessible around the world? Can we, for example, use those disruptions to help farmers to adapt to climate change or to cure diseases where we currently only can treat them? Big questions, but I believe questions that are about to be answered as we speak. And we are really proud at Bayer to be at the forefront of those developments. It's pretty amazing what's happening every day. And I feel being a biorevolutionary at the moment is a place where you should be. Now, let's talk a bit about a couple of quotes and a couple of things that are important for how we do public relations after we spend so much time on talking about some of the undercurrents that we need to manage. The first thing I want to say in very practical terms, and Warren Buffett mentioned that in a shareholder letter in 1996, virtually all surprises are unpleasant for business, be it a positive or a negative surprise. Now, I give you that a negative surprise is usually even more relevant, but my story is that our job is to help navigate the complexity of the world by reducing the number of times leaders and businesses are surprised. That's why we need to be often the eyes and ears of what's going on around the world. And that's why I spend so much time talking about the underlying driving forces. At Bayer, we have basically looked at every issue that could hit the business. I don't want to share all the details with you because some of them are quite confidential. But we have clustered that in the way our business is structured between divisional issues, issues that cut across the different divisions, and issues that are relevant for, let's say, the mothership, that are basically relevant for the corporate level of our organization. I know it's very difficult to navigate these highly matrixed organizations, but the more you structure your organizations to kind of meet those needs, the better. The second topic I want to talk about after surprises is controversy. RepTrak is one of those service providers that looks at the level of controversy that is hitting a business. I found RepTrak to be probably the strongest provider in the space, and I generally believe that we need to beware controversy. Controversy drives regulation. Controversy is what creates problems for businesses. My firm belief is it's not right that we have to always tell our side of the story or that we have to stand our ground. I think a very important role in the area of public affairs is working on reducing the controversies your business or our categories are entrapped in. And that's something I learned in the political space. First, you have to demonize something, and then you can start to regulate. That's why NGOs spend so much time on demonizing business. That's why politicians, even in difficult times, first use like demonization in order to then regulate. For me, a great example was 2008, the financial crisis that hit the United States very hard. It was pretty clear that regulation will follow, but people still talked about fat cats on Wall Street in order to drive the right level of demonization that created permissibility to then regulate the financial industries in order to reduce the future impact of financial challenges. So first, you have to demonize, and then you can start to regulate. Another quote that I find pertinent for what we are doing is Abraham Lincoln's definition of character and reputation. he basically uses the metaphor of a tree and a shade. And I think it's a really insightful quote from Abraham Lincoln. I believe that public relations is a combination of presence and relevance. Now, your presence talks about how you show up, where you show up, whether you are invited in the conversation or not. Your relevance talks about the systemic contribution you can make to solving the problem. And when I look at companies, but also other people operating in the public space, I always wonder whether they have a bigger tree or a bigger shadow. There are a lot of businesses out there who actually have almost not a tree at all, but create this big shadow through presence in the debate. And then there are a lot of businesses that are highly relevant, but they don't really create much shade. And I think the solution is to balance that. And professionals in our space need to make sure that the business is unfolding in a way that demonstrates characters. That's where the values-based leadership comes in order to create the right level of shadow. If we do this, we can be ahead of the curve. And being ahead of the curve is very important for me as well. I learned once that if business doesn't do the right thing, governments will do the wrong thing. Often we complain about bad government decisions, but honestly, at the source of every bad government decision is a business that missed the boat on doing the right thing in the first place. Hardly ever governments resort to regulating us in a mediocre way. What always happens before is that businesses create an unbearable situation. So for us, if we want to avoid bad regulation, let's make sure we get our businesses to do the right thing. The last quote is of a woman that I met in 1994. She was a very young environmental minister in Germany. We were always on opposing political sides, but over the years, Angela Merkel continued to impress me, and I have a lot of respect for her and her leadership. She is not only the first female chancellor of Germany, she is also one of the world leaders that kind of keeps a bit of sanity in difficult times. And the quote from her is, "In politics, emotions are facts." Now, what's going on in India, what's going on in many countries, what's driven also by social media, that emotions, that fake news, that all of those things dominate the political debate much more than we all like, is something we have to be careful about. We have to be careful about it because as much as emotions are important, we have to find a way to rebalance the debate. And we have to make sure that the way social media and facts are used is not going in the wrong direction. I've seen lobby strategies also in the history of Bayer that were actually not driving the right societal decisions, that were actually not driving win-win solutions. And there is a huge responsibility for us as businesses to avoid that. There's also a huge responsibility for us to explain to our business leaders that what they see as like just emotions are actually as much facts as some of the Excel file data points that many of our colleagues use to navigate and run the business. That's why I'm saying let's find a good way to deal with that and to unblock conversations. For me, I use 3 things in every difficult conversation. I try to find a way to credibly acknowledge the weaknesses that we have. I try to bust myth wherever people accuse us as categories or Bayer as a business or me as a person of something that's unfair. But then I try to surprise through action. And for my team, I ask my team to focus on 3 things. I want my team to focus on being a really strong, very well-connected team. So I have goals in that space. I try to focus them on building trust with society. And last but not least, I try to focus them on both value and values. So in other words, on how we really can create some tangible contribution to supporting the company's bottom line. What I realized is that our profession has a much stronger value contribution than we sometimes realize, and certainly that other parts of the business realize. So it's really important to be able to quantify the value you contribute to what you and your teams are doing, especially at times where there is pressure on overheads, on bottom lines. I believe that we are a huge value generator as a profession. The precondition is that we do it in the right way. And I try today to give you a couple of kind of insights as to how I look at it, but I look forward to a conversation about that. And I'm sure that this is only the tip of the iceberg of what we need to look at when looking at our profession. Thank you very much for spending the time with me today. I really appreciate you joining online under very difficult conditions. And more so, I appreciate the invitation to be here and to be able to speak with you. It was a great honor for me.
Where do you think the biodiversity governance is heading, given the rapidly accelerating loss in biodiversity?
I think the biodiversity crisis is one of the biggest crises we are facing. And to solve this biodiversity crisis, we need to do a couple of things. First of all, we need to halt climate change. So decarbonization is going to be crucial. Secondly, we need to stop deforestation. We've seen too much deforestation leading to all kinds of negative effects, from species loss all the way to changes in irrigation patterns. And that is true for Southeast Asia, it's true for Africa, and also for the Americas. So halting biodiversity is really important. We invest $1.5 billion every year in innovations in crop protection, because we believe the current toolbox of crop protection is not at all good enough to address the biodiversity crisis, but we need sustainable intensification. We need to be able to produce more on less land. And my hope is that we will talk about biodiversity as a topic in the same complex way as we talk about climate change, because sometimes people are only focusing on one thing, but they don't look at the other things. So investment in breakthrough technologies, both in seeds and in crop protection, the ability to produce more on less land is one of the preconditions to fix the global biodiversity crisis.
My next question, Matthias, has two parts to it. Do you think innovative climate technologies will foster a long-term global response to climate change? And secondly, if you think it would promote economic growth and sustainable development?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer, and I think the data point of this year just underscores it. I made reference to it in my talk. I'm a firm believer that without breakthrough innovation, nothing will happen. So if you want decarbonization not to end up to be deindustrialization, you have to basically combine four forces. You have to believe in capitalism. You have to believe in science and innovation. You have to believe in sound regulation and in participation. If we are unable to create a situation where all forces move in the same direction, we will run in difficulties. I don't think that a climate strategy that increases poverty has any chance to succeed. And that's why innovations are important. In decarbonization, we need to innovate in three directions. First of all, reduction of carbon emissions. Secondly, investment in technologies, and the biorevolution will help here. Farmers will make money with that, removing carbon out of the atmosphere. And thirdly, we need to double down on investing in resiliency. For example, rice that is currently planted in rice paddies with the need of a lot of water, in the future will grow on dry land. By the way, with the added benefit that it also will lead to less methane emissions. So we need breakthrough technologies to drive resilience so that the people whose life depends on producing our food have the ability to withstand the rapidly changing climate that we experience almost everywhere in the world.
My next question, Matthias, relates to women's healthcare. Do you think prescription products are being modified, especially given the challenges that come with immunity during the times of COVID-19, especially for the elderly and pregnant women?
I think generally that COVID-19 has made it clear for everybody that roughly half of the world doesn't have access to modern pharmaceuticals and best medical care. And if COVID-19 has one positive effect. I think it put the global pharmaceutical industry on a different trajectory. Just this year, the industry came together and pooled money to create a fund that looks at identifying new promising candidates for antibiotics, because we realized that as individual companies, we did no longer do research and development in this space at a scale that is needed. Another great example is, I think, a stronger focus on women in general. For me, the most important development contribution we can make is giving every woman access to family planning. Today, almost 250 million women doesn't have access to family planning. They are not able to kind of fully exercise their reproductive rights. And I think that has to change. Bayer will contribute that more than 100 million women will have access to family planning by 2030. But I think collectively, the world has to close this gap. And it's one of the preconditions to make progress against some of the other global sustainability goals that the UN has identified in 2015. But women's health is much more than reproductive organs. So we need to talk about a much stronger focus on women in general. And that is true for healthcare as well. That's true for cardiovascular. It's true for micronutrients. It's true for all the challenges that have been a bit, I think, orphan challenges in the past. And we, as a leading women's health business, will double down in focusing on this area. This year, we wanted to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the UN Women Conference in Beijing. It has been postponed by a year, but my hope is that in 2021, the world will make breakthroughs in putting women much more in the center of the development conversation as opposed to where they were in the past. That's true for health. It's also true for smallholder farmers, a very important topic for Bayer.
What are the ways in which we can make the world more sustainable? Can you please throw some light on the steps that Bayer is taking towards this?
Yeah, so we as Bayer have decided to be carbon neutral by 2030. We will remove more than 40% of our carbon emission out of our direct supply chain, more than 12% of our carbon emissions out of the kind of supplier side. We will produce innovation that will help farmers to also reduce their carbon emission, because we believe that decarbonization is something we all need to rally behind. In order to get the right business decisions done, 20% of the salary of myself, but also of my CEO and all the other leaders at Bayer, will depend on achieving progress against measurable targets in sustainability. I believe for business to get it right, compensation needs to be linked to making progress, and we need to move from a CSR mindset in sustainability into a mindset of generating impact. We also need to look at our R&D investments. Bayer spends every year 5.5 billion euros in research and development. The top 50 companies, roughly 310 billion euros. We need to gear this innovative force more forcefully in the direction of sustainability. So for us, looking at our innovation pipeline through the lens of the global goals on sustainable development is paramount. Last but not least, I repeat myself, I think that the innovations that will come with the Biorevolution will help us to really drive some of the action in sustainability. And if you will, the rapid kind of identification of vaccines that seems to work, the mRNA vaccines that are talked about right now, demonstrate what the Biorevolution is capable of doing in terms of advancing human development.
It's interesting to know the steps that Bayer is taking towards sustainability. I'm sure it comes with its fair set of challenges, especially when it comes to government regulations. Would you like to share with us what some of those challenges are?
Well, I think we as a crop protection industry have underplayed the relevance of biodiversity. We have overplayed, if you will, the topic of increasing yield per hectare. So where we have to go is we have to marry the goal of intensification with the goal of sustainability. Norman Borlaug 50 years ago won the Nobel Peace Prize for his inventions in plant technology because he was avoiding major famine. And that's why in my lifetime, famine is no longer a multi-million people problem, but a problem of smaller, still too large, but smaller communities. So that was all about intensification. We now need Johan Rockström, who developed the planetary boundary model, to be the second yardstick for the crop protection industry. And the reason why we face a lot of regulatory pushback and also societal pushback is we haven't been fast enough to move our strategic kind of guidepost in the space of sustainable intensification. Extensification is not a solution because we have an increasing demand of a growing and ever richer world population. And we have seen that extensification destroys livelihoods and will not be tolerated, especially not by democratic societies. In the pharma space, regulators want us to reduce pharma prices so that more people can have access to pharmaceuticals. So I think the business model of trying to justify kind of high prices as a result of huge investments in R&D will be questions. And I think the pharma industry in general needs to reach the other 4 billion humans that are currently not in focus of their business models by changing the way they look at their businesses in very radical terms.
Thank you very much. And that brings me to my last question. Well, we are all getting into the new year, so it'd be interesting to know from you what you think 2021 has in store for all of us when it comes to climate change and sustainability.
Well, we started this year with the slogan of the decade of delivery. So 2020 was the year of doubling down. 2021 will be, in my book, the year where we really start the decade of delivery. We have postponed a lot of important events. I talked about the UN Women's Conference, the Convention on Biodiversity, COP26 in Glasgow, which looks at climate change, but also something that was initially scheduled for 2021, the UN Food Systems Conference. All of those events are basically driving my optimism that we will play catch up so that the slowdown of 2020 will be reversed in 2021. For the business community, this means to be full on and to double down and to support bold government action so that we really can get closer to delivering the ambition of the global goals on sustainable development, for which we have roughly 10 years. So as much as the pandemic is slowing us down at the moment, I'm bullish on the innovation in vaccines. I'm bullish on the improvements of treatment strategies. And I hope that in 2021, we will kind of relieve the grip of the vaccine on the world, of the pandemic of the world through vaccines, and we will get start to really double down on action. The United States elections, with an incoming president-elect Joe Biden, indicates that the Americans are also willing to be back in the global debate. For me, leaving the World Health Organization in the midst of a pandemic or trying to kind of bleed the World Trade Organization as a very important body, or leaving the Paris Climate Accord, all of those decisions of my home country have been decisions that moved in the wrong direction. And I see a reversal of the United States. I hope that a country like India will assume a leadership position in this space as well, already in advance to the G20 hosted by India in 2022, which then could be another year of bold actions that help us to solve some of the biggest problems we talked about today. Thank you very much.